Welcome back to Air Quality Matters and One Take. One Take, my take on a paper or report on air quality, ventilation and the built environment. One take in that it's, well, one take and tries to summarise for you a scientific perspective on something interesting in, well, usually 10 minutes or less, because who has the time to read all these amazing documents, right? And amazingly, we're at episode 10 already, who can believe it? This week, we're diving into a paper that really gets to an interesting question. With all the new radon detectors on the market, from cheap consumer-grade gadgets to expensive pro gear, which ones can we actually trust? The paper is called Performance Evaluation of Radon Measurement Techniques in Single-Family Homes by Joan F and colleagues. Now, that title might sound a little bit dry and technical, but what it's really asking is, do you need to spend a fortune and wait a whole year potentially to find out if you have radon problems? And the answer, well, they're pretty encouraging and I think very practical. So let's set the scene. We all know, or at least we should know, that radon is a serious issue. It's a naturally occurring radioactive gas. You can't see it or smell it, and it's the leading cause of lung cancer among non-smokers. It's a big deal, and for years, the gold standard, the official way to measure it in many countries, has been the use of these little plastic kind of hockey puck type things called passive dosimeters or passive samplers. You stick one in your living room, maybe one in the basement or up in a bedroom, and you leave it there for a long time, typically 3 months, and in some cases even for a full year. Then you mail it off to a lab and wait for the results. It's a slow process. It's a bit of a black box for the homeowner, and it leaves you in the dark for a fairly long period of time. The logic has always been that you need long-term averages to smooth out the daily and seasonal fluctuations, which is very common with radon. But is that always necessary? Well, the first thing these researchers did was test that very idea. They went into 20 single-family homes in Switzerland across different geological regions, which is important, and they put these passive dosimeters in for a full year. But they also placed identical dosimeters right next to them for a shorter period. 3 months in winter, 6 months in winter, and 3 months over summer. Then they compared all those short-term results against the 1 year measurement. And you know what they found? The results were remarkably consistent. The 3-month winter measurements, for instance, lined up incredibly well with the full year average. The data showed a really strong correlation. It certainly challenges any idea that you absolutely must measure for a full year to get a reliable picture. The study suggests that for most situations, a 3-month measurement, particularly during the heating season when radon levels are often higher and most stable, is perfectly adequate. Just think about the implications of that. It saves time, it saves money for housing authorities and homeowners, and it gives people the answers they need to take action much faster than leaving it in for a longer period. But honestly, that's only half the story. The really interesting part for me is what they found when they looked at the new wave of real-time electronic radon monitors. You've definitely seen these online. There's a whole spectrum from affordable consumer-grade gadgets you can buy for a couple of £100 or dollars, all the way to professional-grade equipment that costs thousands. It's a bit of a wild west out there, and people are rightly skeptical. So the researchers took a range of these devices, categorizing them as consumer-grade, medium-grade, and top-tier research-grade reference monitors, and placed them in the same homes, right alongside the passive dosimeters. They let them run for a full year, collecting continuous data. As you might expect, they found a clear correlation between price and performance. The medium-grade sensors were more accurate, with an average error of about 10% compared to the reference devices. The consumer-grade sensors had a slightly higher error, around 18%. So yes, in a way, you do get what you pay for in terms of precision. But here's the crucial bit. Even with that 18% error, the study found that the consumer-grade devices were still good enough for their intended purpose. When compared to the long-term passive dosimeter results, the real-time monitors both consumer and medium grade generally stayed within the 20% error margin. What does this mean in the real world? Well, it means for a homeowner, a housing association, or a building manager who just needs to answer the fundamental question, are my radon levels above the recommended action level? These affordable devices are potentially a viable tool. They might not be perfect for a rigorous scientific paper, but for flagging a potential problem and providing peace of mind or a call to action, they absolutely do the job. This is a game changer. It democratizes the data. It puts the power to monitor a serious invisible health risk directly into the hands of the people living and working in these buildings, without them having to break the bank. The paper does add a small but important note of caution about the very short-term 7-day passive tests. It found that these can be pretty inaccurate, especially at low radon levels, often overestimating the concentrations significantly. So they're probably best used just to get a very rough first idea in a home you already suspect has a high concentration, but you definitely want to follow up with a longer test. So to wrap this up, the work by Ray and the team is incredibly valuable because it's based on real-world field measurements, not just pristine lab conditions. It gives us two major takeaways that should change how we think about radon measurement. First, the old way of measuring, the passive dosimeter, 3 months is good enough, which makes the whole process much more efficient and is in line, to be honest, with many recommendations in a lot of countries. And second, the new way of measuring with affordable real-time sensors is reliable enough for most practical purposes. It's not about one method being good and the other bad. It's about understanding we have more tools in our toolbox now, and it's about picking the right one for the job. For a homeowner, an affordable real-time monitor gives them the continuous insight and immediate feedback they need. For an official assessment, a 3-month passive test might be all that's required to make a decision. From my own personal experience of using both tools in this toolkit, I found consumer-grade products to be very effective and in line with the outcomes of the paper, but would add that a bit like the passive samplers, it's worth looking at month averages rather than averages over days or even weeks. Radon is a fickle beast, and you need time to smooth out the odd behaviour in the spaces. This research provides a pragmatic and evidence-based path forward. It helps us move from rigid, sometimes outdated protocols to smarter, faster, and more effective ways of ensuring our buildings are safe. And that, at the end of the day, is what it's all about. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of One Take. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next week. And thanks a million, as always, to the sponsor of the podcast, who without them, this would not be possible. Safe Traces and Imbiot. See you next week.